Damn interesting. The Gimli Glider. Long form. When a botched imperial to metric conversion left a commercial jet with insufficient fuel, pilots had to improvise. Written by Alan Bellows, non-fiction, November 2007. Holy shit. Inside the cockpit of a crashing airliner, Captain Bob Pearson was understandably alarmed by the out-of-the-ordinary beeps that were chiming. From his flight computer on the control plane, an amber low fuel pressure warning lamp lit up to punctuate the audio alarm. First Officer Maurizio Quintal, co-pilot of the Air Canada Flight 143, checked the indicator light to determine the cause of the computer's complaints. "Something's wrong with the fuel pump," he reported. The mustachioed Captain Pearson pulled out the trusty Boeing handbook, his fingers dashing through the pages to find the specifics of the warning. To his relief, the troubleshooting chart indicated that the situation was not as spurious as it might seem. The fuel pump in the left wing tank was signaling a problem, a minor issue considering that gravity would continue to feed the engines even if the pump failed. "You know," he commented to co-pilot Quintal, "I would not take this error." He trailed off as the computer blurted out another 4 beeps, and the indicator panel lit up like a Christmas tree decorated with bad news. "Oh, fuck," Pearson lamented. "We've got to go to Winnipeg." The date was 23 July 83, and although the fuel pressure warnings were not the flight's first mechanical frustrations, they were certainly the most distressing so far. When pilots Pearson and Quintal had arrived for their shift earlier that day, they had been notified that the plane's fuel gauges were non-functional due to a fault at the Fuel Quantity Indicator System, FQIS. Even worse, the component required to repair it could not be delivered until later this evening. Rather than cancelling the flight, Captain Pearson instructed the engineers to check the fuel levels manually. The 4-month-old 767 was a state-of-the-art machine with state-of-the-art glitches, and FQIS issues were becoming a common complaint. Several independent dripstick checks later, the fuel hosters were satisfied that sufficient fuel was loaded, and they advised Air Canada Flight 143 to take off. The airliner departed from Montreal at 5:48 p.m. Eastern Time with their 61 passengers. At 6:58 p.m., they made a brief scheduled stopover in Ottawa, where engineers once again checked the fuel dripsticks just to be safe. It was just after 8 p.m. Central Time that the cockpit computer began its string of inexplicable beeps and warning lights. As the jumbo jet crossed the Canadian countryside at 41,000 feet, co-pilot Quintal thumbed through the 767 handbook to ascertain the nature of the airplane's problem. "They don't say anything if you've got more than one though. Main tank, he said to Captain Pearson, as well as the flight engineer who had joined them. "Like there's 2 pumps. They don't say anything about only one, According to the computer's calculations, there should have been plenty of fuel remaining, but multiple fuel pumps were indicating pressure problems." The flummoxed flight crew decided to divert to the nearby Winnipeg airport as a precaution, and alerted Air Traffic Control ATC of their intent. Air Canada 123 cleared present position, direct Winnipeg. The tower responded, "We're landing runway 31, you're cleared to maintain 6,000 descend your desertion." Pearson and Quintal updated their flight computer with the new heading and destination. Air Canada 143, "Did you want any assistance?" the traffic controller inquired. "Where assistance is an aeronautic euphemism for a reception from the fire brigade. Here is the cockpit of a typical Boeing 767. For the moment, we won't require any assistance, Pearson responded. The flight engineer struggled to assess the situation. You got nothing in the center tanks, eh? He inquired of the captain. No, we ran the pumps. The captain replied, referring to an earlier attempt to transfer fuel from another tank. Let's put them back on again. Within moments, several more warning lights snapped on in a quick succession. Goddamn, Quintal remarked. They're all going out. How about... All the lights are on, Pearson observed soberly as the array of low fuel pressure indicators glowed with incandescent urgency. The captain summoned the in-charge flight attendant to the cockpit and apprised him of the situation. But his summary was outdated mere moments later. The flight computer bellowed out a flamboyant bong, which none of the men present could recall having heard before. Okay, the captain observed upon examining the instruments. We are lost the left engine. Okay, what will we do? Quintal replied. Want the checklist now? Checklist, yeah. The pilots began preparations for a delicate but very doable single-engine landing, and the co-pilot Quintal contacted Winnipeg Tower to request the previously offered assistance. It was becoming increasingly clear that the plane's problems lay not in its machinery, but in its fuel. The men, however, were unsure of exactly what was amiss. Following 2 minutes of uneventful descent, the ever-present vibrations in the deck were disrupted by an almost imperceptible shudder, and the white noise hum of the remaining jet engine faded away with a long and melancholy mechanical sign. The gauges and monitors of the control panel, which had been so animated with anxiety mere moments before, fell dark. Absent the usual murmur of the twin turbofans, an unsettling silence hung heavy in the air. How come I have no instruments? Captain Pearson wondered aloud, though the answer lingered mockingly in the cockpit's uncharacteristic quiet. The airliner's generators and hydraulic systems required at least a single functioning engine in order to operate, without which there was no electricity for the computer, and no power to manipulate the ailerons, rudder, and elevator. In effect, the highly advanced flying machine had roughly the maneuverability of a flying brick, with barely enough instrumentation to monitor its slow dive toward the Earth. After a few ponderous moments, however, the automatic emergency systems twitched into action. Onboard batteries revived a few of the most critical instruments, and the door popped open on the plane's underbelly to expose a ram air turbine, designed to provide limited emergency hydraulic support. 143, the radio crackled. We have lost your transponder return right now. Captain Pearson was beginning to grasp the true gravity of the situation. Center 143, this is a mayday and we require a vector onto the closest available runway. We are out of 22,000 feet on. Both engines have failed due to looks like fuel starvation, and we are on emergency instruments and can only give you limited headings. Information, we are heading 250 now. Please give us a vector to the nearest runway. 143 copy. All that okay. We have lost your transponder return and attempting to pick up your target now. We have it now. Just stand by on the 250 heading. Roger. This is Captain Bob Pearson. After repeated unsuccessful attempts to restart the stalled engine, Pearson and Quintal once again consulted the 767 emergency manual, this time for advice on an unpowered landing. Much to their dismay, no such section existed, presumably because a simultaneous engine failure had been too ridiculous for Boeing engineers to contemplate. The pilots sat anxiously in their darkened cockpit and monitored the plane's slow and silent descent using a handful of analog instruments based on pre-World War II technology, a magnetic compass, an artificial horizon, an airspeed indicator, and an altimeter. The traffic controller in the tower at Winnipeg advised the flight officers of their options. One for free, we show you at 65 miles from Winnipeg and approximately 45 miles from Gimli. Okay, Pearson responded, is there emergency equipment at Gimli? Negative emergency equipment at all. Just one runway available, I believe. And no control and no information on it. We'd prefer Winnipeg then. In a stroke of profound luck, Captain Pearson was an accomplished glider pilot, a skill which afforded him with some sense of the vehicle's glide capabilities. He applied his experience to estimate the plane's best glide ratio speed. But having neither a vertical speed indicator nor a view of the landscape through the clouds, he was unaware that Winnipeg was well beyond the reach of their gravity-gripped flight equipment. Back in the passenger compartment, the in-charge flight attendant radiated counterfeit calm as he informed the plane's 61 passengers of the situation, and instructed them in the subtle art of not freaking out during an in-flight emergency. In the meantime, crew members directed able-bodied men to move into the rows alongside the exit doors, then solemnly buckled into their own seats. Many of the crew members were keenly aware that jumbo jets such as theirs were not designed for a dead-stick flight, let alone dead-stick landing. In all probability, their inevitable confrontation with the Earth would not be an improvement on their current situation. As the impromptu glider emerged from the ceiling of clouds and obtained a view of the landscape, the pilots quickly realized that the plane was shedding altitude far too quickly to have any chance of reaching Winnipeg. Co-pilot Quintal confirmed this conclusion using radar data from air traffic control. How far are we from Gimli? Pearson inquired the Winnipeg tower. You are approximately 12 miles from Gimli right now. Air traffic control had no specific data on the remote airstrip, but in another stroke of luck, First Officer Quintal had been stationed there during his time at the Royal Canadian Air Force. Lacking any feasible alternatives, the co-pilot recommended they drop in on his old friends from the service. He was not aware, however, that the facility had since been converted into a public airport, nor did any of the men know that one of its 2 runways had been decommissioned and carved up for use as a racetrack. I have to say that this reminds me of a production incident. Usually when we are programming, and sometimes there is a production incident and you face many issues and you try to resolve them one by one. So this looks like a similar process. Each time there is a new failure and you try to fix it or work with it or work around it. As Flight 143 fell below the air traffic control radar range, the tower grimly requested a count of the souls on board. As Pearson began his long final approach, he scraped up a bit of optimism as he updated Winnipeg Tower on their status. "We have the field in sight," he reported, "and we feel we're in good shape." On the ground at Gimli, it was Family Day at the local racetrack. Sports racers buzzed along the decommissioned runway as spectators cheered from the sidelines. A collection of campers at the end of the airstrip soaked up the summer Saturday evening as their dinners sizzled on assorted barbecues. Without the jet engines to announce the airliner's approach, the people were oblivious of the 132-ton Boeing behemoth which was bearing down on them. In the cockpit, co-pilot Quintal activated the manual landing gear controls, and the two main gears lowered and locked. The nose gear, however, dangled limply from its housing. For Captain Pearson, the flight controls were becoming increasingly difficult to operate. The effectiveness of the emergency RAT was governed by the speed of the wind slipping. This is the turbine, something like the air turbine that they open that will bring electricity, RAT. So the effectiveness of the emergency RAT, the air turbine, was governed by the speed of the wind slipping around the fuselage. So as the plane gradually slowed, the hydraulic assistance was diminishing because they had less air. Nevertheless, Pearson needed to sharply reduce the speed and the altitude of his approach. Otherwise, the 767 would overshoot the tarmac, and without engines, there would be no opportunity for a second try. Ordinarily, an airline pilot would apply some combination of flaps and aerobrakes, but none of these systems were functioning on Pearson's crippled craft. Lacking a more orthodox option, Captain Pearson cracked the control wheel to the right and gave the left rudder pedal a firm stomp. The crisis crossed controls tilted the deck to the right as one wing dipped toward the ground, providing the passengers with a lovely view of the golf course on the side, and nothing but blue sky on the other. The fast leg also rotated its heading to the left, becoming diagonal relative to its direction of the travel. Such forward slip maneuvers were sometimes used on small plane and gliders, but the curved bullish acrobatics were unheard with the jumbo jet. The airplane indeed decelerated. So he tried to move the airplane to the side in order to decelerate it. But the reduced airspeed robbed the controls of even more precious hydraulic pressure, requiring Pearson to apply monumental force to try to straighten the slip. At the opposite end of the runway, the Family Day campers and the spectators had finally spotted the silent and oddly angled incoming aircraft, and they were scrambling from its path with appropriate levels of panic. First Officer Quintal caught sight of the fleeing families, but it was far too late to revise their landing plane, so he opted not to distract the captain with the unsettling discovery, orientation of the aircraft during forward slip maneuver. 40 feet above the ground, mere seconds before contact, Captain Pearson managed to wrestle Flight 143 back to a straight and level approach. At 8:38 p.m. Central Time, the rear landing gears grabbed the tarmac and Gimli Airport, and Bob Pearson stood on the brake pedals As the airplane skid toward the scattering bystanders, a few of the loudly protesting tires finally succumbed to the abuse and blew out with adequate force to shimmy the fuselage. As some of the weight shifted forward, the unsecured front landing gear buckled, dumping the nose section onto the pavement and spraying 300-foot shower of sparks. Okay, so the main thing here is that they used a maneuver without brakes to slow down the airplane. After sledding across the asphalt for 2,900 feet, Air Canada Flight 143 ground to a halt just a few hundred yards from the shocked onlookers. There was a moment of stab-filled contemplation within the passenger cabin, followed by an eruption of cheering and applause. Meanwhile, several astute racetracks workers dashed the nose of the Flight 143 and doused a small fraction of induced fire using handheld extinguishers. Within a few minutes, the inflatable rubble escape shots plopped from the sides of the plane and the 69 frazzled occupants disembarked. A crew of engineers from Winnipeg Airport clambered into a van and headed for Gimli to assess the damage. During transit, however, their vehicle unexpectedly ran out of fuel, nearly ripping a hole in the delicate space irony continuum. When airline mechanics finally arrived at the landing site, they found all three of the 767 fuel tanks completely dry with no evidence of a fuel leak. So there was no evidence of a fuel leak, so why wasn't there fuel? A review of the day's events traced the problem back to the manual dripstick checks in Montreal and Ottawa. In order to maintain awareness of the overall weight of the aircraft, flight crews kept track of fuel quantity based on kilograms, rather than the fuel company's liter-based measurements. Pearson and Quintal had determined the fuel weight by multiplying the number of dripstick liters by 177, as indicated by the documentation. However, unbeknownst to the pilots and the fuel crew, this multiplier provided the weight in imperial pounds. The new all-metric 767 was based on kilograms and required a multiplier of 0.8. As a consequence of this documentation disconnect, Flight 143 had left Montreal with roughly half the necessary fuel. So it was confusions in the scale and the metrics. One used pounds, another used liters, etc. Kilograms. Because the rear escape slides were excessively steep due to the buckled front gear, a few bumps and bruises were sustained on egress, but no one was seriously injured at Gimli in this incident, had it not been for Pearson's capable captaining and glider experience, as well as Quintal's camber cool support. The outcome of the metric mix-up might have been considerably less pleasant. In addition, had it not been for the drag created by the collapsed front gear, the powerless plane would have plunged into the crowd of spectators, sowing destruction and death in its wake. All told, the soon-to-be dubbed Gimli Glider was the name of this event is the Gimli Glider, was a nearly perfect demonstration of dead stick flying, accompanied by an extra large portion of good fortune. With just 2 days of mechanical jiggering, Captain Pearson's wounded 767 was patched up sufficiently to fly it out for repairs elsewhere. The Gimli Glider officially rejoined the Air Canada fleet after a bit of bodywork, a new front gear, a new wiring harness, a repair fuel quantity indicator system, and a full load of jet fuel. The internal investigation into the incident laid the blame partially upon Captain Bob Pearson and First Officer Maurice Quintal, who should have observed the minimum equipment list (MEL) and grounded the aircraft since it lacked functional fuel gauges. Some of the responsibility was also assigned to the maintenance workers and to corporate deficiencies As a consequence of Pearson was briefly demoted and Quintal was suspended for 2 weeks. Nonetheless, both pilots continued to work for Air Canada, and in 1985 they received the well-deserved Federation Aeronautic International Diploma for Outstanding Airmanship for their handling of the unusual landing. As for Gimli Glider herself, the 24-year-old 767 remains an active part of the Air Canada fleet to this very day. Some grizzled old pilots swear that sometimes when the wind is just right on the quiet might, you can just about make out the double-engine failure bong as the old girl is flying by, and if you're very lucky, you might catch the faint odor of dumped pilots in the air. Update: the Gimli Glider, Air Canada Flight 143, was retired from service on 24 January 2008 in a ceremony involving Captain Robert Pearson, First Officer Maurice Quintal, and 3 of the 6 flight attendants who had been aboard Flight 143 during the unscheduled glide and rough landing. Okay, so this was, from them interesting, the Gimli Glider.